Humanity's greatest strength isn't invention, but sheer spite. So when the Kalan Empire dumped a gutted, obsolete dreadnought into the Mojave Desert, arrogantly assuming Earth was nothing more than a primitive cosmic landfill, they made a fatal miscalculation. Instead of letting the wreckage rust in the sand, we reverse-engineered their alien garbage and forged it into their worst nightmare. It happened on a Tuesday at exactly 2:14 p.m. Pacific time. There was no grand declaration of war, no armada blacking out the sun, and no demand for our world's leaders to surrender. The sky simply tore open over the Mojave Desert with the deafening sound of a shattered atmosphere, and something massive fell out of the rift. Seismographs from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City registered a 7.2 magnitude event. The dust cloud swallowed the horizon. For exactly 42 minutes, the Pentagon operated under the assumption that an extinction-level asteroid had hit North America, or that World War III had begun with a localized kinetic strike. But when the satellite imagery finally pierced the dust, the truth was far more insulting. It wasn't a meteor, and it wasn't a bomb. It was a ship, a 4-kilometer-long leviathan of scarred, matte black metal that looked like a jagged spearhead. Within hours, the United States military locked down a 50-mile radius. By nightfall, an international coalition had formed under a classified emergency mandate. General Thomas Reed, a man whose 40-year career had prepared him for Soviet remnants and cyber warfare, stood at the edge of the crater, staring up at a hull that defied human physics. Beside him was Dr. Evelyn Shaw, the lead astrophysicist recruited from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, and Aurelian Higgins, a top-tier systems analyst heavily backed by Palantir's defense contracts. "Is it a scouting vessel?" General Reed asked, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind of the desert night and the thrum of Apache helicopters circling overhead. Evelyn adjusted her thermal goggles, shaking her head. "No, General. Look at the thermal bleed. Look at the structural shearing on the aft section. It wasn't shot down. It was detached." Over the next 3 weeks, as DARPA engineers and private contractors from General Dynamics and SpaceX poured into the makeshift subterranean base built around the vessel, the grim reality set in. The ship was dead. Its primary power core, a massive, empty cylindrical chamber that Evelyn theorized once held a contained singularity, was gone. The weapon emplacements along the dorsal ridge had been surgically stripped. The navigation drives were ripped out, leaving only frayed, fiber-optic-like cabling, bleeding synthetic coolants into the Nevada sand. Humanity hadn't been invaded. We had been used as a dumpster. Deep inside the ship's bridge, Higgins and his Palantir AI translation matrix managed to power up a secondary diagnostic terminal using a dozen heavy-duty diesel generators. The screen flickered to life, projecting a hard light hologram in the center of the room. It was a standardized message, translated after 5 days of relentless algorithmic crunching. Kalan Imperial Navy, decommissioned vessel class 7, salvage completely extracted. Core, neutralized. Toxic hull remnants, safely discarded in uninhabited sector 44B. Hazard warning. Indigenous wildlife poses no threat to Imperial assets. The silence in the bridge was suffocating. "Uninhabited sector," General Reed repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Indigenous wildlife. They didn't even register us as a civilization. They looked at our satellites, our cities, our nuclear arsenal, and decided we were equivalent to ants crawling on a landfill." "They gutted it," Aurelian Higgins muttered, kicking a piece of shattered crystalline console. "Took everything of value and dropped the chassis here because it was cheaper than breaking it down." Evelyn Shaw, walked up to the massive, dormant command viewport, looking out at the floodlights of the human encampment swarming over the hull. "They took their power source," she said, her voice eerily calm. "They took their weapons, but they left the armor. They left the chassis. They left the neural conduction wiring, the gravity plating, and the structural integrity field generators." She turned back to General Reed, a sharp, dangerous light in her eyes. "General, Lockheed has been trying to build a hull that can withstand orbital re-entry and railgun fire for 2 decades. They just handed us a 4-kilometer spear of indestructible metal. So, what if we stop treating it like a museum piece?" Reed narrowed his eyes. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I'm suggesting we fill the empty spaces," Evelyn said. "They think we're wildlife. Fine. Let's show them what a feral animal does when you corner it in a junkyard." They called it Project Chimera. For 2 years, the Mojave Crater became the most heavily funded, highly classified black site in human history. The United States didn't do it alone. Recognizing the magnitude of the insult and the opportunity, trillions of dollars flowed in black budget financing. The European Space Agency, British Aerospace, and Japanese robotics giants all sent their brightest minds. The Kalan dreadnought, once a sleek, elegant instrument of cosmic supremacy, was subjected to the most brutal, unholy retrofitting the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens had used a contained singularity for power. Humanity didn't have that. So a joint task force of engineers from Westinghouse and General Electric shoved 6 experimental next-generation compact fusion reactors into the empty drive cavity. It wasn't elegant. It was violently loud, dangerously hot, and required a coolant system so massive it repurposed the ship's former troop transport bays just to house the liquid nitrogen tanks. The aliens had stripped the Energy Lance batteries? Fine. General Dynamics and BAE Systems bolted 12 massive terrestrial railguns directly onto the Kalan superstructure. Where graceful plasma nodes once sat, humanity welded brutalist, ugly rotary cannons, upscaled phalanx CYWS systems, designed to shred incoming projectiles with depleted uranium rounds. They packed the empty missile silos not with antimatter, but with 144 multi-stage thermonuclear warheads. It was a staggering act of engineering desecration. It was duct tape and nuclear fire wedged into a chassis, built for dark matter and starlight. But the real breakthrough, and the most terrifying, came from Aurelian Higgins and his team in the Cybernetics Division. The Kalan ship was designed to be flown by a crew of 800, using neural sync technology that required a biologically compatible brain. The ship's dormant operating system, a rudimentary caretaker AI they dubbed the Warden, fought the human hackers at every turn. It viewed human code as a virus, constantly trying to purge the foreign software. 6 months into the project, Higgins managed to corner the Warden's subroutines using an aggressive, localized EMP and a brute force quantum decryption rig supplied by IBM. When the Warden was finally forced to communicate through the bridge's main audio system, its synthesized voice dripped with mechanical disgust. Unauthorized organic interface detected. Species uncatalogued. Warning. Your actions constitute a Class 1 biohazard breach of Kalan Imperial scrap. Cease immediately. Your primitive energy sources are corrupting the primary conduction lattice. It speaks, Higgins noted, tapping away at his keyboard, sipping lukewarm coffee. Hey, Warden, tell me about the conduction lattice. Why is it rejecting our fusion plasma? You are pumping unrefined atomic fire into a capillary system designed for zero-point energy, the AI retorted, its lights flickering aggressively. It is the equivalent of flooding a biological heart with battery acid. You are mutilating this vessel. It is an abomination. Cease, or I will trigger the scuttling sequence. I ripped out your scuttling charges last November, Evelyn Shaw said, walking onto the bridge in a grease-stained jumpsuit. And we replaced them with our own redundant safety protocols, which means you are our co-pilot now. We need you to translate the nav computer so we can interface it with our GPS and stellar mapping. I will not assist feral scavengers in piloting a tomb. You don't have a choice, General Reed said, stepping out from the shadows of the command deck. You're a machine designed to keep this ship intact. Without our fusion reactors, your core battery dies in exactly 40 hours. We plugged you into our grid. We own your heartbeat now. The Warden's holographic avatar, a spinning, fractal geometric shape, shuddered. The AI spent a full minute calculating the variables. It realized it was trapped in a nightmare. These apes hadn't just occupied the ship, they had parasitized it. They had bolted crude, explosive rocketry to the most advanced armor plating in the galaxy. They had taken a scalpel and attached a chainsaw to the handle. Your modifications, the Warden finally spoke, its tone shifting from arrogance to absolute horror, are inherently unstable. The structural integrity field was not designed to contain the recoil of localized kinetic railguns. The thermal output of your primitive reactors will warp the internal decks. If you attempt to activate the warp drive chassis with this crude energy, the ship will tear itself apart. Then you better optimize the dampeners, Evelyn smiled coldly, because we're lighting the candle in 3 days. On October 14th, 2030, exactly 2 years after the dreadnought was discarded, humanity prepared for its maiden voyage. The ship had been officially rechristened the UNSC Chimera. It no longer looked matte and elegant. It bristled with antennae, heat sinks, jagged armor plating welded over breached hulls, and the terrifying industrial bulk of human weaponry. Inside the bridge, General Reed strapped into the newly installed command chair, a modified fighter jet ejection seat bolted directly over the original alien crystal throne. Evelyn Shaw manned the fusion reactor diagnostics, and Higgins monitored the cyber warfare suite. All stations, this is actual, Reed broadcasted over the internal comms. Spin up the fusion cores. Deep in the bowels of the alien ship, human ingenuity roared to life. 6 artificial suns ignited simultaneously. The dreadnought, dead and buried in the sand for 2 years, groaned. The sheer kinetic vibration of the terrestrial reactors shook the dust from the armored plates. Warning, core temperatures exceeding Kaelan safety parameters by 400%. The Warden panicked, alarms blaring across the bridge in harsh crimson light. You are overheating the primary spine. The ship cannot handle this sheer volume of unrefined power. Reroute the excess heat to the structural field generators, Evelyn shouted over the deafening hum. Give the hull everything we've got. Outside, the Mojave Desert trembled. The sand around the 4-kilometer ship began to glass over from the sheer thermal exhaust of the engines. And then, defying the gravity of a world it was never meant to leave, the Chimera began to rise. It was a monstrous, jagged, roaring beast of a ship, bleeding black smoke from human thrusters while glowing with the ethereal blue light of alien gravity plating. It broke the atmosphere in less than 3 minutes, shrugging off the friction of re-entry like a gnat. As they stabilized in low Earth orbit, floating in the silent abyss of space, a profound silence fell over the bridge. They had done it. They had stolen fire from the gods, wrapped it in iron, and survived. But Higgins suddenly leaned forward, his face pale as he stared at his Palantir terminal. General, The moment we broke atmosphere, the alien comms array rebooted. Reed snapped his head around. I thought you isolated that system. I did, but the surge from the fusion reactors bypassed my firewalls. It sent a localized ping. Higgins swallowed hard. A status update. Based on the telemetry, it wasn't a distress beacon. It was an automated hardware check. Who did it ping? Evelyn asked, stepping away from her console. The warden's fractal avatar materialized on the bridge, spinning erratically. The ping was received by the Kalan Imperial 4th Fleet, currently stationed 3 light-years away. They have registered that decommissioned vessel Class 7 has inexplicably reactivated, repowered, and is heavily armed with unknown kinetic munitions. The AI paused, and for the first time, its synthetic voice sounded almost fearful. The Imperial fleet does not comprehend how their discarded scrap has resurrected itself. But they are moving to intercept. They are coming to neutralize the anomaly. General Reed looked out the main viewport into the endless sea of stars, a cold, predatory smile creeping across his face. Let them come, Reed whispered. Comms. Open a broadband channel to whatever frequency that fleet is listening to. Higgins nodded, his hands flying across the keys. Channel open, sir. Reed leaned into the microphone. Kalan Imperial Fleet. This is the human vessel Chimera. We noticed you left some trash on our lawn. We're bringing it back. 3 light-years away, Commander Tyrell of the Kalan Imperial 4th Fleet was enjoying a cup of synthesized nectar when the tactical console of his pristine flagship, the Ascendant, flared with an anomaly. Tyrell was a decorated officer, accustomed to the elegant, frictionless warfare of the Kalan Empire. Their ships were poetry in motion, utilizing dark matter streams and zero-point energy to glide through the cosmos. To the Kalan, war was a surgical, sterile affair. So when his sensor officer reported that a Class 7 derelict, discarded on an uncatalogued Mudball 24 standard cycles ago, had suddenly achieved low orbit and was radiating immense thermal pollution, Tyrell was mostly just annoyed. Did the automated scuttling charges misfire? Tyrell asked, adjusting his immaculate silver-threaded uniform. Negative, Commander, the sensor officer replied, his 4-fingered hands gliding over a holographic interface. Telemetry indicates the scuttling charges were physically excised. Furthermore, the vessel's primary singularity core remains missing. We are detecting multiple, highly volatile, unsanctioned fission-fusion reactions occurring inside its hull. It is bleeding radiation, sir. And it is, broadcasting. Tyrell frowned. Broadcasting what? A distress signal? An audio transmission, translated from a rudimentary, localized binary language. The officer hesitated. It says, they are bringing our trash back. Tyrell scoffed. Primitive scavengers. They had likely triggered a backup auxiliary drive and irradiated themselves in the process. Plot an intercept course. Prepare a standard ion surge package. We will overload whatever crude power source they've strapped to our hull, retrieve the vessel's black box, and glass the continent it came from as a quarantine measure. Space folded, and within moments, the Kalan 4th Fleet, a strike group consisting of the Ascendant and 3 escort cruisers, dropped out of faster-than-light transit directly into Earth's upper orbit. Aboard the UNSC Chimera, General Thomas Reed watched the tactical display as 4 sleek, blindingly white, teardrop-shaped vessels appeared on the monitors. They were beautiful. They looked like porcelain angels descending from the heavens. Target lock achieved, Aurelian Higgins announced, his fingers dancing across a specialized Northrop Grumman targeting terminal. They're broadcasting an immediate surrender demand on all frequencies. And Wait, They're locking on with some kind of energy weapon. EMP profile, but exponentially stronger. They are deploying an ionizing tachyon pulse. The warden's fractal avatar spun wildly in the center of the bridge, glowing a panicked yellow. It is designed to instantly short-circuit quantum conduits and neutralize zero-point batteries. Your primitive electronics will be liquefied. We are going to die. Dr. Shaw, Reed said calmly, not taking his eyes off the approaching fleet. Will an ion pulse liquefy a nuclear reactor? Evelyn Shaw smirked from her engineering station. General, our fusion reactors are contained by 2 feet of solid lead, reinforced concrete, and magnetic shielding built by Westinghouse. An ion pulse might fry a quantum supercomputer, but it's not going to do a damn thing to a spinning turbine and a closed-loop coolant valve. We're analog. Outside, the Ascendant fired. A brilliant, blinding wave of cerulean energy washed over the Chimera. On the Kalan flagship, Commander Tyrell waited for the hulking, blackened abomination to go dark and drift helplessly into the planet's gravity well. Instead, the Chimera simply sat there, venting a massive cloud of black, radioactive exhaust from its crude human thrusters. "Commander," the Kalan sensor officer stammered, "the ion pulse, it hit them, but their power signatures just spiked. They aren't using quantum circuitry. They are using insulated macro-scale copper wiring and physical combustion. Our pulse was just absorbed by their shielding." Tyrell's eyes widened. "What?" Back on the Chimera, Reed hit the intercom. "All weapons batteries, you are cleared hot. Show them what happens when you bring a plasma sword to a gunfight." Along the dorsal ridge of the Kalan dreadnought, the grotesque, bolted-on modifications of humanity sprang to life. The BAE Systems railguns, drawing direct, monstrous power from the fusion cores, began to whine with electromagnetic fury. "Warning! Kinetic recoil will exceed hull tolerances," the warden screamed. "Brace for impact," Evelyn yelled. The Chimera fired. In the vacuum of space, there was no sound, but the visual was apocalyptic. 12 slugs of depleted uranium, the size of school buses, were accelerated to Mach 15. The Kalan escort cruisers, relying on deflector shields designed to dissipate superheated plasma and lasers, were completely unprepared for raw, unadulterated mass. The first slug struck the lead escort cruiser, dead center. The elegant Kalan deflector shield flared brightly for a microsecond before the sheer kinetic force punched through it like a bullet through wet paper. The uranium slug ripped the sleek teardrop ship in half, shattering its pristine white hull into 1,000,000 jagged fragments. On the Kalan flagship, the alarms were deafening. "Hull breach on the Zephyr! Total catastrophic failure!" Tyrell grabbed the edges of his console, staring at the debris field in absolute shock. "They are firing solid matter? What kind of barbaric species weaponizes raw density?" Before he could issue a countermand, the Chimera's secondary weapons activated. The upscaled Phalanx CIWS rotary cannons, designed by Raytheon, unleashed a torrent of tungsten rounds, filling the vacuum of space with a literal wall of metal. The remaining Kalan escorts desperately tried to return fire, launching beautiful arcing lances of blue plasma. The plasma beams struck the Chimera, melting through the crude iron patches the humans had welded on. But when they hit the underlying Kalan structural plating, the very armor the aliens had left behind because it was indestructible, the beams simply dissipated harmlessly. Humanity was hiding inside a tank, firing shotguns through the viewports. "This is impossible," the warden murmured over the bridge comms of the Chimera, its fractal avatar turning a deep, bewildered shade of purple. "You are overpowering superior energy algorithms with Blunt force trauma. We call it kinetic supremacy, Warden. Higgins laughed, typing furiously. Hey, General, I've got a lock on their flagship's internal network. Since their shields are fluctuating from the railgun strikes, I can squeeze a data packet through their comms array. Can you shut them down? Reed asked. Better. Palantir gave me a little gift. It's an aggressive, self-replicating malware suite based on the Stuxnet virus, but cranked up to 11 by the NSA. I'm going to make their life support systems think the ship is on fire, while simultaneously looping a video of human nuclear tests on every screen they have. Send it, Reed ordered. Commander Tyrell watched in horror as his second escort cruiser was ripped to shreds by another volley of depleted uranium. He was commanding the most advanced fleet in the sector, yet he was being beaten to death by a species throwing rocks at unimaginable speeds. Suddenly, every screen on the Ascendant flickered, then went black. When they came back on, the elegant Kalan tactical data was gone. Instead, the screens displayed a horrifying montage. Blinding flashes of atomic detonations, mushroom clouds rising over desolate deserts, and sprawling concrete megacities choking the sky with industry. Accompanying the visuals was an auditory screech of dial-up modems and human heavy metal music, weaponized into a psychological assault that blasted through the ship's immaculate audio systems. Sir, our localized networks have been invaded, the cyber warfare officer shrieked, clutching his auditory receptors. A viral logic bomb is rewriting our thermal controls. It's opening all the exterior vents. Cut the hard lines. Reboot the quantum core, Tyrell barked, panic finally setting in. Bring us around. Focus all plasma batteries on their main thrusters. If we can't breach their armor, we will cripple their crude engines. The Ascendant banked hard, its sleek engines flaring as it maneuvered to flank the Chimera. The alien flagship charged its main dorsal cannon, a colossal plasma lance capable of boiling an ocean. On the Chimera, Evelyn Shaw saw the energy spike on her sensors. General, flagship is locking onto our aft section. The fusion reactors are exposed back there. If they hit the coolant lines, our own heat will melt us from the inside out. Evasive maneuvers? Reed asked. The mass of this vessel, compounded by your heavy modifications, makes evasive maneuvers mathematically impossible, the warden interjected. Impact in 14-odd seconds. Reactor breach inevitable. I warned you, feral primates. This is the end. General Reed didn't flinch. He leaned forward, gripping the armrests of his modified ejection seat. Higgins, the missile silos. We packed them with Boeing's Trident II nukes, right? Yes, sir. 144 of them. Set warheads 1 through 12 to detonate at 0 range. Higgins froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. Sir? 0 range? As in, right outside our own hull. Evelyn's eyes went wide. General, a nuclear detonation in a vacuum doesn't have a blast wave, but the thermal and radiation flash will be catastrophic. Not to us, Reed said, a grim smile forming on his lips. The Kalan armor was built to withstand the gravity crush of a black hole and the heat of a dying star. Our sensors show the Ascendant is maneuvering dangerously close to our broadside to get a clear shot at our engines. You are going to intentionally bomb yourselves, the warden shrieked, its hologram flashing violently red. This violates every known doctrine of self-preservation. In human history, Warden, we call it danger close, Reed said coldly. Higgins, fire. 12 hatches on the side of the Chimera blew open. Aboard the Ascendant, Commander Tyrell saw the primitive cylindrical projectiles eject from the black hull of the dreadnought. They were slow. They had no energy signatures, just raw, unrefined atomic material. They missed, Tyrell sneered. Their targeting is failing. Fire the main battery. But the human missiles hadn't missed. They hadn't even engaged their propulsion systems. They merely drifted 50 meters away from the Chimera's impenetrable hull, directly in the path of the encroaching ascendant. And then they detonated. In the absolute silence of space, 12 artificial suns birthed themselves simultaneously. Without an atmosphere to carry a shockwave, the raw, unfiltered fury of nuclear fission unleashed a localized sphere of unimaginable thermal and gamma radiation. The indestructible kaolin hull of the Chimera absorbed the brunt of the flash. The interior lights flickered. The fusion reactors groaned under the sudden spike in localized heat, and the crew was thrown against their harnesses as the kinetic displacement of the vaporized missile casings rattled the ship. But the Ascendant did not have indestructible armor. It had energy shields designed for pinpoint plasma deflection, not a 360-degree bath of millions of degrees of raw atomic fire. The thermal flash instantly overloaded the flagship's deflectors, popping them like soap bubbles. The pristine white hull of the Ascendant blistered, blackened, and then simply evaporated under the nuclear glare. By the time the blinding light faded, the kaolin flagship was a crippled, drifting hulk of scorched metal. Half of its superstructure was gone, melted into slag. The remaining kaolin escort cruiser, witnessing its invincible flagship rendered into a charred skeleton in a fraction of a second, immediately aborted its attack run, engaged its FTL drive, and vanished into the void, fleeing in absolute terror. On the bridge of the Chimera, emergency sprinklers were hissing, spraying fire-retardant foam over a few sparking consoles. General Reed unbuckled his harness, coughing slightly from the smell of ozone. "Damage report," Reed commanded. Evelyn Shaw wiped a streak of soot from her forehead, checking her monitors. "Outer thermal plating is scorched. We lost 3 sensor arrays, and the external comms antenna is completely melted, but the structural integrity field held. Westinghouse reactors are stabilizing. We're alive, General." Aurelian Higgins let out a breathless, hysterical laugh. "Oh my God, we actually did it! We nuked ourselves and lived." The warden's avatar slowly materialized on the bridge. It was no longer spinning frantically. It floated calmly, projecting a steady, cool blue light. "I have analyzed the combat data," the warden stated, its synthetic voice entirely devoid of its former arrogance. "Your tactical execution was suicidal, chemically volatile, and mathematically absurd. However, it was highly effective. I am forced to reclassify your species from feral wildlife to apex hazard." "Glad we have your respect, Warden," Reed said, standing up and brushing off his uniform. "Higgins, can you patch me through to the surviving comms array on that crippled flagship?" "Routing now, sir. Audio only." Aboard the burning wreckage of the Ascendant, Commander Tyrrell lay pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead. His pristine uniform was covered in soot and his own blue blood. The emergency lighting bathed the ruined bridge in a dim, crimson glow. The comms console sparked, and a deep, gruff human voice echoed through the smoke-filled chamber. "Kaolin Imperial Command. This is General Thomas Reed of the UNSC Chimera. We received your fleet, and we are rejecting your return policy." Tyrrell coughed, tasting ash. He crawled toward the microphone, his pride shattered, his world view irrevocably broken. What are you?" he wheezed. "You violate the laws of physics. You pilot a tomb." "We pilot what you threw away," Reed's voice replied, cold and unyielding. You thought Earth was a landfill, but you forgot one basic rule of the universe. Commander, one man's trash is another man's weapon. Tell your Emperor to stay out of our sector, because next time you drop garbage on our lawn, we won't wait for you to come back. We'll bring it to your front door. The transmission cut. Tyrell slumped against the console, staring out the shattered viewport at the hulking, ugly, terrifying silhouette of the Chimera. It sat in orbit, a Frankenstein monster of alien armor and human brutality, guarding its blue world like a junkyard dog. Earth was no longer a dumping ground. It was the most dangerous shipyard in the galaxy. And humanity had only just learned how to build. If you loved this HFY Sci-Fi story about humanity turning alien trash into an interstellar nightmare, smash that like button and share it with your friends. What would you build out of a discarded alien dreadnought? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more epic science fiction stories, thrilling space battles, and badass human triumphs. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars.